Anyway, let's go from one real world to another very interesting potential realm, and that is space.
Final front.
Sorry. Yes, space, the final frontier. This is not actually a story about Sarah Parcak and space archaeology and satellites. This is actually the discussion, and indeed, apparently, they're looking for archaeologists to fill the role as being active observers of the culture on board the International Space Station. Uh, do you think that's a job for archaeology?
When we first talked about this last week, when we were planning this particular watching brief, I remember mentioning to you that this reminded me very much of I think it was John Schofield's excavation of a transit van.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at it as a cultural object and what its users and occupants had left in it over the life of this particular vehicle.
Don't really want to think about that.
Well, having watched a very interesting documentary about life on the road with bands in the 1960s on BBC4 the other week, no, you don't want to think about that. No, in all seriousness, if you take the view, and it's certainly a view that I take, that you can apply the techniques of archaeology to what happened a moment ago, then yes, of course, it's perfectly legitimate. Sending somebody independently to do the field work might be a bit difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. We have a number of colleagues now, and you've talked about Sarah Parcak, who style themselves as space archaeologists, i.e., they use remote sensing devices in space, or they're starting to look at the material that has been left in space by the activities of humans, not least. There was a wonderful spoof piece that I was reading the other day, which is a takedown of the whole moon landing fate story, where it talks about Stanley Kubrick being brought in after the success of 2001: A Space Odyssey to direct the moon landing. And he was such a perfectionist that he insisted on building sets on the moon, which you could still see.
He insisted on pioneering the rocket technology. And
it's a brilliant article. We'll post the link to it. It's a very funny spoof. But you see where I'm going with this. There is now archaeology on the moon and on Mars that has been left by people. There's bits of Beagle 2 spread over the surface of Mars, sadly. And I think I'm right in saying that the UN is is thinking around protocols for how to deal with this stuff. Heritage is now off planet.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, for example, the question of things like the ownership of the moon, I think that was addressed in the 20th century.
Indeed,
in broad strokes, at least. And the answer is no one owns the moon. Or certainly no nation can own the moon. But yeah, especially as we're seeing more and more private interests getting involved in, for example, their own little space programs, this is going to become more and more of a pertinent archaeological frontier. And in this case, in the ISS, what we actually have is because you've got to remember that or one has to remember that they already have, for example, psychologists and all manner of behavioural studies going on, especially if nothing else to analyse the effects of microgravity, isolation, being stuck with people from different countries. For all this stuff is in a very real social space. But actually, what's interesting is that what they want to do is have archaeological researchers who, it says here, mine databases of all the objects that have ever been sent to ISS and draw from a huge number of photos taken on board to create a four-dimensional digital model. So presumably that means 3D with the element of time of the space lab. And in this virtual space, they hope to track patterns of movement of astronauts and objects over time, which might allow them to understand patterns of life on the station in the same way they might do when looking at an archaeological site on Earth. The problem is, though, there is an overabundance of data. It says, so one future aspect of the project would be crowdsourcing help from volunteers who want to go virtual artifact hunting. So presumably, if you're trying to track like 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 a piece of blue tack through
Yeah.
through the space station. You can do it. I don't know. Is this a job that you'd be intrigued by?
To be frank, no.
Okay.
No. What I am interested in is that those issues of the cultural material. Neil Armstrong's One Small Step for a Man. That footprint, that first footprint, as far as we're aware, because of the nature of gravity and the lack of atmosphere and so on the moon, is still there and still pretty much as it was in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
That is probably one of the most important cultural artifacts. It's like the first footprints that we find of early hominids.
Yes, it's like there's the Natoli footprints of it.
Lake Natoli, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is, it is in that degree of importance in cultural history, and so that I'm very interested in, and how we deal with that, and also the fact we've all got that role model in Jean-Luc Picard, of course, was an archaeologist on Starship, and he was the captain of the Starship Enterprise.
Indeed, yeah. Well, exactly. That's the only destiny for us. We've got to be the captains of an interstellar exploratory peacekeeping and also actually scientific expedition. That's what we've got to do.
But also, what's really interesting, I've just been doing some research on this for a paper I've been writing about fake history and so on. But back in the 1960s, when Gene Roddenberry invented the Star Trek universe, he and his producers and designers invented Star Trek, and his writers invented the Star Trek universe.
What? Sorry. Do you mean that's not actually the future?
Well, we don't know. He may have been there and then come back to write about it. Okay. So it's all part of the,
okay. Sorry.
when Gene Roddenberry was describing the Star Trek universe that he'd seen, having gone forward,
Sorry, go on.
When they were putting together the Starship Enterprise, they knew they needed a database.
Yeah,
wouldn't have called it that then, but they invented the library computer. And if you look at the documents and the books that were written at the time about Star Trek, the library computer was designed to be a synthesis, a repository, but for all the knowledge that humankind had gathered up to that point. So the plays of Shakespeare, the origin of species, you name it, it's there. The poems of Omar Khayyam. It's this universal source. But really interestingly, what he also put in was that there were protocols to exclude fake facts.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's interesting. So could do you think then space archaeology could be a brave new frontier where we finally kill the odious term fake news? I don't know how the heck is, sorry, that's a whole other rant, but how on earth has the term fake news become a thing? It's either a fact or it's not.
No, come on. We all know that, as Kellyanne Conway pointed out, there are alternative facts.
Oh, there are alternative facts. This is true. Well, but that is interesting actually, and that's I think that's what I was getting at when I sort of joked about the future. Is that it is a very optimistic vision of humanity in the future, free of disease, free of economic constraints, and exploring the stars. Just briefly, just coming back to this this project though, or the potential for this project. Says here, most traditional senses, archaeologists don't work like this. They'll go to an ancient site and they'll systematically record artifacts. It says here, but it says that archaeologists may in fact be uniquely positioned as scientists to understand human behaviour in social spaces. And actually, the archaeologists don't just have to be thinking about the past; they can also think about the future. So it says here, archaeologists might be uniquely qualified to study how humans, even living humans, use their environment and material things regardless of time. And so actually, I quite like this idea of, as you were saying, this idea. Archaeology is right up until the moment I put down my glass. It's also moon landings. It's that person's transit van. And in this case, it's a recasting of archaeology and the ideas that we've gained in a new realm. And this is happening in other places as well. I mean, for example, one that I'm very aware of would be, for example, the realm of digital realm. So, for example, some people play computer games as archaeologists. I sort of dabble with that and have some fun with it. But the thinking that we've been doing for the past 100 and a bit years, this may actually be the next application of this stuff with living people. It's an interesting, it's very interesting, I think, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. I know some archaeologists won't be remotely interested, but it's a very interesting call for jobs, or for a task. Sorry.
I mean, I think stepping back from it. Well, a couple of very quick observations, perhaps just to finish this segment from me at least. One is that archaeologists do spend so much of our time looking at spaces and how people use spaces and how we interpret the use of space, even on very little evidence. So any space that we can look at, this space floating around in outer space called the ISS, how people use that, how they divide it up, how they create personal space within this machine space. And actually, given the cost of it, it's probably the highest status space that anyone will ever live in for the foreseeable future. Or certainly for until a bigger, better version or iteration of the ISS is put up there. So that's the one thing. So I think it's absolutely valid to look at it in anthropological and archaeological terms in that respect.
Well, because also the space is existing in isolation as well. That's the other thing as well. So if there's a conflict, you can't move, you can't leave. No. And so you also have an exquisite case study for example, conflict resolution, as you say, the creation of personal space, the balance in such a intense environment between personal, private, communal, but also in that sense functional space as well. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
I think also what's very interesting, going right back and looking at it in terms of cultural anthropology and the development of personal worldviews and things like that, you go right back to the impact of the Apollo. You read the accounts of the Apollo 8 astronauts, those first guys who went round the moon in 1968 and saw Earthrise. And that famous photograph of the Earth from the moon that was taken by Apollo 8. And very few of the astronauts talk about religious experiences, but they do talk about a humanist experience, that they suddenly see themselves in relation to both this little beautiful blue-green planet that's described in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Poor little planet, but also in terms of space as well, and their role, and how vulnerable it looks in that vastness. And there is an argument that those pictures really gave a huge boost to for example, the ecology movement. So again, there's a real rationale for doing this kind of work. I think the final thing I would say is I just think it's really important that archaeology seeks constantly to develop and redefine itself, because otherwise we just stagnate as a discipline. So I'm all for it.
To go where no archaeologist has gone before. Indeed. Yes.
See what you did there.
Thank you. Well, I cannot top that. Splitting the infinitive or not.